Somewhere in a windowless data center right now, tens of thousands of processors are running hotter than the surface of a stove, burning through more electricity than a small city. Also, a machine can finish a sentence. Nobody outside a handful of buildings on Earth knows exactly what that machine is capable of. And that, right there, is the most unsettling part of this story. Because for the first time in the history of technology, the people building the most powerful tool ever created are not entirely sure what they built, what it will become, or who will control it when it's finished. This is the story of that machine, and the three-way race to build it first. A race being run not in secret military bunkers, but in glass office towers in San Francisco, in research campuses in London and Mountain View, and in state-backed laboratories scattered across Beijing, Hangzhou, and Shenzhen. A race with no finish line clearly marked, no referee, and stakes that some of the smartest people on the planet believe could determine who leads the 21st century. Call it what insiders increasingly do, quietly, almost nervously, the AI war. To understand how we got here, you have to go back further than most people expect. Not to 2022, when a chatbot called ChatGPT suddenly made artificial intelligence a household word, but decades earlier, to the unglamorous, often mocked field of machine learning. For most of its history, AI was a punchline in computer science, a promise that never quite delivered, cycling through booms and long, cold winters of disappointment. Researchers built systems that could play chess, then systems that could recognize handwriting, then systems that could tag photos, and each time the public got excited, and each time the technology hit a wall. But underneath the disappointment, something patient and stubborn was happening. A small community of scientists kept refining an old idea, the neural network, a mathematical structure loosely inspired by the tangle of neurons in a human brain. For years, neural networks were considered a dead end, computationally too expensive, mathematically unstable, a beautiful idea that simply didn't work at scale. Then, in the early 2010s, three things quietly converged, and almost nobody outside the field noticed. The internet had generated an ocean of data, more text, images, and video than any human could ever read or watch. Computer chips originally designed for rendering video game graphics, called GPUs, turned out to be extraordinarily good at the exact kind of math neural networks needed. And a handful of researchers figured out how to stack these networks deeper than anyone thought possible, training them layer upon layer upon layer. This was the birth of what we now call deep learning, and it changed everything. Suddenly, machines that could barely tell a cat from a dog were identifying faces with superhuman accuracy. It was the first sign that something extraordinary was coming, and the companies that noticed first would spend the next decade fighting to stay ahead of it. Google noticed early. It quietly acquired a small London research lab called DeepMind in 2014, founded by a former chess prodigy and humanity could work on. DeepMind's ambitions weren't modest. They wanted to build systems that could learn the way humans learn, through trial, error, and reward, an approach called reinforcement learning. In 2016, the world got its first real glimpse of what this obsession could produce. DeepMind's AlphaGo, a program trained to play the ancient board game Go, defeated one of the world's top human champions in a match watched by over 200 million people, most of them in Asia. For those with Go, understand this. It isn't chess. The number of possible positions on a Go board exceeds the number of atoms in the observable universe. Experts had predicted it would take AI another decade to conquer the game. It took considerably less. And somewhere in that moment, in living rooms across China, South Korea, and Japan, a quiet alarm went off. If a machine could master a game once considered the pinnacle of human intuition, what else could it master? That question landed hardest in Beijing. China's government, watching the AlphaGo match unfold in real time, treated it less like a sporting upset and more like a Sputnik moment, a stark demonstration that a technological frontier was opening and China risked falling behind on it. Within a year, the Chinese State Council released a sweeping national strategy declaring its intention to become the world leader in artificial intelligence by 2030. This wasn't a vague aspiration scribbled in a policy document destined for a shelf. It came with staggering financial backing, coordinated support across state-owned enterprises, universities, and a new generation of ambitious private companies, and a level of top-down urgency rarely seen outside wartime industrial mobilization. From that point forward, this stopped being merely a contest between companies. It became unmistakably a contest between nations. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Pacific, a different kind of urgency was brewing, driven less by government mandate and more by a small group of engineers and entrepreneurs who genuinely believed and feared that they were building something with the power to remake civilization. In December 2015, a nonprofit research lab was founded in San Francisco with an almost audacious mission. Statement: to ensure that artificial general intelligence, AI, that matches or exceeds human capability across virtually every domain, benefits all of humanity rather than a single company or country. That lab was OpenAI. Its founding backers included some of the most recognizable names in Silicon Valley, people who had grown wealthy building the internet as we know it, and who were now pouring resources into what they saw as the next, far more consequential technological leap. The nonprofit structure was deliberate. The founders worried, publicly and repeatedly, that if a single corporation raced ahead and captured overwhelming advantage in artificial intelligence, the consequences for the balance of global power could be irreversible. Better, they need to build it in the open, share the research, and keep the technology's benefits distributed rather than hoarded. That idealism collided with reality faster than almost anyone expected. Training cutting-edge AI models turned out to be staggeringly, almost absurdly expensive, requiring specialized chips costing tens of thousands of dollars apiece, purchased by the tens of thousands, running around the clock in facilities that consume electricity on an industrial scale. A nonprofit, however well-funded, simply could not keep pace. In 2019, OpenAI restructured, creating a capped profit arm that could accept massive outside investment while, in theory, preserving its original mission. The following year, a few outside the tech industry had heard of committed billions of dollars to the partnership. That company was Microsoft, and the alliance would prove to be one of the most consequential corporate partnerships of the decade, giving OpenAI access to the one thing no ambition or brilliance could substitute for: raw, overwhelming computational power. And then came November 2022. OpenAI released a research preview of a conversational AI system, expecting modest interest, a useful tool for developers and researchers to poke at. What happened instead was unlike anything the technology industry had witnessed in a generation. Within 5 days, over 1 million people had used it. Within 2 months, it had become, by some measures, the fastest-growing consumer application in history. That system was ChatGPT, and for the first time, ordinary, not just engineers and academics, could sit down and have something resembling a genuine conversation with a machine. Ask it to write an essay, explain quantum physics, debug computer code, draft a wedding speech, and it would respond instantly, fluently, often astonishingly well. It wasn't perfect. It made confident, articulate mistakes, a phenomenon researchers call hallucination, stating fabricated facts with the same fluency as true ones. But the illusion of understanding was so convincing that it didn't matter to the 100 million people who signed up in the first 2 months alone. The genie, as more than one researcher put it privately, was out of the bottle, and there was no putting it back. What made ChatGPT possible was a breakthrough architecture called the transformer, published in a landmark 2017 research paper by a team of scientists, fittingly enough, at Google. The transformer allowed neural networks to process language by weighing the relationships between every word in a sentence simultaneously, rather than one at a time, unlocking a level of contextual understanding that earlier systems simply couldn't achieve. It is, without exaggeration, one of the most important papers in the history of computer science. And here is the twist that still stings inside Google's walls to this day. The company that invented the technology underpinning the entire generative AI revolution did not release the product that captured the world's imagination. OpenAI did. Google, cautious about reputational risk, wary of releasing a technology known to fabricate information and reproduce biases from its training data, sat on more advanced capabilities internally for months, sometimes years, while a smaller, faster-moving rival shipped first and captured the narrative. It was a lesson every major AI lab has since absorbed. In this race, hesitation has a cost, and that cost is measured not just in market share, but in who gets to define the future. Google did not stay on the sidelines for long. Internally, the company declared what employees described as a code red, an all-hands mobilization to accelerate its AI efforts and merge its two major research divisions, DeepMind and Google Brain, into a single unified lab. The combined entity, Google DeepMind, began releasing its own family of powerful language models, investing heavily in multimodal systems capable of understanding not just text, but images, audio, and video together, and pursuing what many researchers consider the more scientifically ambitious long-term bet: using AI to solve fundamental problems in biology, chemistry, and mathematics. In 2020, years before ChatGPT existed, DeepMind had already stunned the scientific world with AlphaFold, a system that essentially solved a 50-year-old grand challenge in biology, predicting the three-dimensional structure of proteins from their genetic sequence with startling accuracy. It's difficult to overstate what this meant. Protein structures determine how diseases work and how drugs might treat them, and scientists had spent entire careers determining single structures through years of lab work. AlphaFold predicted the structures of nearly all proteins known to science and made that database freely available to researchers worldwide, It is, by any measure, one of the most significant scientific contributions artificial intelligence has ever made to humanity, and it happened almost entirely outside the public spotlight that ChatGPT would later steal. But while American labs raced to out-innovate each other, a quieter, differently shaped competition was accelerating on the other of the world. China's AI ecosystem doesn't map neatly onto Silicon Valley's model of scrappy startups and venture capital bets. It is a hybrid, part state directive, part fierce commercial competition among some of the largest technology companies on Earth. Baidu, often described as China's answer to Google, built its own large language model and integrated it deeply into search and mapping products used by hundreds of millions daily. Alibaba, the e-commerce giant, developed an open family of AI models that quietly became some of the most widely downloaded and modified by developers globally, embracing an open source strategy, sharply different from the more guarded approach of its American counterparts. Tencent, ByteDance, and a wave of well-funded startups joined the field, all backed by a government treating AI leadership as a matter of national strategic priority, comparable to how earlier generations of policymakers treated steel production or spaceflight. Then, in early 2025, a moment arrived that sent a genuine shockwave through Silicon Valley and through global financial markets. A relatively obscure Chinese AI lab called DeepSeek released a model that, by independent benchmarks, performed competitively with the best systems built by OpenAI and Google, systems that had cost hundreds of millions, in some cases billions of dollars to develop. DeepSeek's team claimed to have trained their model for a fraction of that cost, reportedly around $6 million for the final training run, using a cluster of chips that were, notably, less advanced than the cutting-edge hardware American labs relied on. The claim was disputed, the true cost debated fiercely by analysts who argued it omitted years of prior infrastructure investment and research. But regardless of the exact figure, the technical achievement itself was real, verified by outside researchers who tested the model directly, and the market reaction was immediate and brutal. In a single trading day, chipmakers and technology companies tied to the assumption that AI dominance required staggering, near-limitless capital spending lost hundreds of billions of dollars in combined market value. The prevailing wisdom, that only companies with the deepest pockets and the newest chips could compete at the frontier, had just been publicly, painfully challenged by a team many in the West had never heard of a week earlier. DeepSeek's breakthrough exposed something that had been building quietly for years, a technology Cold War being fought not just in research papers, but in export control offices in Washington. Beginning in 2022 and escalating steadily afterward, the United States government imposed increasingly aggressive restrictions on the sale of advanced AI chips to China, aiming to slow the country's ability to train frontier AI models by cutting off access to the specialized processors that make it possible. The logic was straightforward. If you can't stop the algorithms, you can try to choke the hardware. China responded by pouring extraordinary resources into building its own semiconductor industry from the ground up, an effort complicated by the staggering technical difficulty of manufacturing the world's most advanced chips, a process requiring machines so precise they can pattern features smaller than a strand of DNA, produced by only a handful of companies on Earth, concentrated overwhelmingly in the Netherlands and Taiwan. Chinese firms like Huawei pushed forward anyway, developing domestic chip alternatives and racing to close a gap that industry analysts estimated at anywhere from 2 to 5 years behind the cutting edge, an estimate that narrowed uncomfortably fast every time a new Chinese model matched Western performance using supposedly inferior hardware. This is where the story stops being purely about technology and becomes something closer to geopolitics, because the chips themselves have become one of the most strategically contested resources on the planet, arguably more consequential to 21st century power than oil was to the 20th. Taiwan, the tiny island responsible for manufacturing the overwhelming majority of the world's most advanced semiconductors, sits at the center of one of the most dangerous flashpoints in global politics. And every analyst who studies the AI race eventually arrives at the same uncomfortable observation: the country that controls the most advanced chip. Manufacturing on Earth controls, in large part, the pace at which the rest of the world can build artificial intelligence. It's a vulnerability every major power is acutely, anxiously aware of, and it's part of why the United States has invested tens of billions of dollars trying to bring advanced chip manufacturing back onto American soil, a process that takes years and enormous capital, even when the political will and funding exist. Meanwhile, back inside the labs, the competition has taken on a strange new dimension because the frontier researchers themselves have become as valuable and as fiercely contested as the chips they depend on. Top AI researchers, the small pool of scientists with genuine expertise in training frontier models, have commanded compensation packages that rival professional athletes and Hollywood stars, with some reported offers reaching into the tens of millions of dollars, and in a few extraordinary cases, considerably more, for a single researcher to switch labs. Meta reportedly assembled a new secretive superintelligence lab in 2025 by aggressively recruiting talent away from OpenAI, Google, and other rivals with astronomical pay packages, a move that stunned even veteran Silicon Valley observers accustomed to fierce hiring wars. It's a strange kind of arms race, one measured not in missiles or warheads, but in the migration of a few hundred human minds between a handful of buildings on the American West Coast, minds that collectively understand something the rest of the world does not yet fully grasp: how to build the most powerful technology in human history, and just as importantly, how to control it once it exists. That question of control brings us to the deepest fault line running through this entire story, one that has already fractured friendships, founded rival companies, and consumed entire organizations from within. In November 2023, OpenAI's own board abruptly fired its chief executive, an extraordinary, almost unprecedented move for a company at the absolute center of the AI world. The reasons were murky, described only in vague terms about a breakdown of trust, but insiders and outside observers widely interpreted it as the surfacing of a deep tension that had existed at OpenAI since its founding, a tension between those who believed the technology's risks demanded caution and slower, more careful deployment, and those who believed the competitive pressure of the moment demanded speed, arguing that if OpenAI didn't move fast, a less careful competitor would build the same technology with fewer safeguards anyway. Within days, under pressure from employees, from Microsoft, and from public scrutiny, the chief executive was reinstated and much of the board that ousted him was gone. The episode, brief as it was, offered the outside world a rare, unfiltered glimpse into just how high the internal stakes had become and how thin the margin was between an organization's founding ideals and the gravitational pull of a genuine technological arms race. That tension between caution and speed sits at the heart of the most consequential unanswered question in this entire field. What happens if or when someone builds artificial general intelligence, a system capable of matching or exceeding human intelligence across essentially every cognitive domain, not just language or images, but reasoning, planning, scientific discovery, everything? Nobody, not the researchers building these systems, not the government officials trying to regulate them, agrees on how close we actually are. Some prominent figures in the field have suggested it could arrive within this decade. Others, equally credentialed, argue the current approach, however impressive, may hit fundamental limitations long before reaching anything resembling genuine general intelligence that, scaling up existing techniques, produces increasingly fluent pattern matching, without ever crossing into true understanding or reasoning. This is not settled science. It is, at best, an educated, deeply contested guess made by people who have enormous financial and reputational incentives to believe, and to say publicly, that the breakthrough is close. What is not in dispute is the pace of capability improvement happening year over year, sometimes month over month. Systems that once struggled with basic arithmetic can now solve competition-level mathematics problems. Models that once produced generic, formulaic text can now write functioning software, debug complex codebases, and in controlled research settings, contribute meaningfully to scientific literature reviews and hypothesis generation. AI systems have begun assisting researchers in drug discovery, compressing years of laboratory experimentation into months, and in material science, helping identify new chemical compounds with properties that could reshape batteries, solar panels, and semiconductors themselves, a strange, almost recursive loop where AI helps design the very chips that will train the next generation of AI. In medicine, AI diagnostic tools now match or exceed human specialists in reading certain medical images, spotting early signs of disease that trained doctors sometimes miss, though regulators worldwide remain cautious, requiring extensive validation before these tools take on greater autonomous responsibility in patient care. In education, adaptive AI tutoring systems are being piloted in classrooms from rural India to suburban Ohio, promising personalized instruction at a scale no human teacher workforce could ever provide. While critics warn of over-reliance eroding critical thinking, particularly in younger students still developing foundational reasoning skills. And then there is the application that keeps military strategists and ethicists awake at night in equal measure: autonomous weapons and AI-driven warfare. Modern militaries, from the Pentagon to the People's Liberation Army, are integrating AI into surveillance, logistics, and targeting systems at a pace that has far outstripped the international legal frameworks meant to govern warfare. Autonomous drones, AI-assisted intelligence analysis, and algorithmic decision support in command centers are no longer speculative science fiction. They are active areas of defense investment on every side of this race. The ethical questions this raises are staggering. and largely unresolved. Should a machine ever be permitted to select and engage a target without direct human authorization? Most Western militaries currently insist on keeping a human in the loop for lethal decisions, a principle enshrined in official policy, though critics point out that as decision cycles compress from minutes to milliseconds, the practical meaning of meaningful human control becomes increasingly murky. This is one of the areas where the AI race stops feeling like an abstract contest of corporate valuations and starts feeling like something with genuinely civilizational stakes. It's against this backdrop that governments have scrambled, often years behind the technology itself, to build some kind of regulatory guardrail. The European Union moved first and most aggressively, passing sweeping AI legislation that categorizes systems by risk level and imposes strict obligations on the most powerful models. The United States has taken a more fragmented approach, issuing executive orders, convening voluntary safety commitments from major AI labs, and debating federal legislation that, as of this recording, remains unresolved, caught between competing fears. Fear of moving too slowly and allowing genuine harms to accumulate unchecked, and fear of regulating too aggressively and ceding technological leadership to geopolitical rivals who face no such constraints. China, meanwhile, has implemented its own regulations, requiring security assessments and content controls on generative AI systems, reflecting a governance philosophy less concerned with existential risk in the abstract and more focused on maintaining social and political stability, ensuring AI-generated content aligns with state guidelines. Three very different philosophies of control running in parallel, with no global consensus in sight and no international body with the authority or the trust of all major powers to enforce one, even if consensus somehow emerged. Underneath all of this, quietly, a deeper unease has been growing inside the labs themselves, among the very people building these systems. In 2023, hundreds of AI researchers and industry leaders, including senior figures from OpenAI, Google DeepMind, and other frontier labs, signed a public statement, deliberately kept to a single sentence for maximum clarity, declaring that mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks such as pandemics and nuclear war. Read that again. The people building the technology, the ones who understand its inner workings better than anyone else alive, put their names to a statement invoking the language of existential risk. Not a fringe group of outside critics, the builders themselves. That single fact tells you something important about where we actually are in this story. A technology powerful enough that its own creators feel compelled to publicly flag the possibility, however remote some of them privately believe it to be, that they might be building something they cannot ultimately control. Whether that fear is a genuinely proportionate response to the technology's trajectory, or an overcorrection shaped by decades of science fiction imagery from sentient robots to rogue supercomputers, remains one of the most fiercely debated questions among experts who study this field professionally. Skeptics argue that current AI systems, for all their fluency, remain fundamentally narrow, brilliant at prediction and pattern completion, but lacking anything resembling genuine goals, self-preservation instincts, or independent agency, in that fears of an AI takeover mistake, statistical sophistication for consciousness. Others counter that the danger isn't a sentient machine plotting humanity's downfall, but something more mundane and, in some ways, more immediately plausible. Powerful systems pursuing poorly specified goals with tremendous competence, optimizing for the letter of an instruction while violating its spirit in ways their human overseers never anticipated, deployed at scale before anyone fully understands their failure modes, embedded into financial systems, power grids, and military infrastructure faster than our ability to test and understand them. Both camps, despite their disagreements, share one uncomfortable point of consensus. The competitive pressure of this three-way race between American labs, Chinese labs, and the geopolitical rivalry underneath them makes careful, cautious deployment structurally difficult. Every additional month spent on safety testing is a month a competitor might use to pull ahead. It is, in the truest sense, a prisoner's dilemma playing out at civilizational scale, where the rational choice for each individual actor may be the collectively dangerous one for everyone. So where does this leave us, watching from the outside, as this race accelerates around us in real time? The honest answer is that nobody knows how this story ends. Not the CEOs commanding $100 billion valuations, not the researchers who understand the mathematics better than anyone alive, not the government officials trying, and largely failing, to keep pace with legislation. What we do know is this: in the span of less than a decade, a technology once confined to research papers and science, fiction has become the central axis around which global economic competition, national security strategy, and scientific ambition now revolve. Trillions of dollars in market value, the industrial policy of the world's two largest economies, and quite possibly the trajectory of human civilization itself are now bound up in the outcome of a race between a handful of Laboratories in California, London and China, racing to build a mind that might one day rival or exceed our own. The engineers building it describe the work in strikingly different terms depending on who you ask. Some with the giddy excitement of scientists on the edge of the greatest discovery in human history, others with the quiet, guarded caution of people who suspect they may be playing with something far larger than they fully understand. Perhaps both descriptions are true simultaneously. Perhaps that contradiction, exhilaration, and dread occupying the same room is the truest measure of exactly how consequential this moment really is. Because somewhere tonight, in those windowless data centers scattered across 3 continents, the training runs continue. The processors keep burning, and the next version of the machine is already, quietly, learning to be a little more capable than the one before it. The only question left, the one nobody watching this can afford to look away from, is what it learns next and who gets there first.